Mastercast. We're me and my good friend Danny over there, who's sitting in his car, talk about horror movies and streaming shows. Today we are talking about Shudder's show Horror's Greatest, which we've been covering on this channel. We'd like to add our points to all the points that talking heads have made. I'm sitting here rocking my Rogue One t-shirt, which is one of my favorite horror comedies.
Ooh.
Yes, and down there we have a special guest. We have Mike Bongiorno, who is from Pop Culture Man Children. So it's always a great time when Mike's on the show. Mike, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. What's up?
Not much.
So everybody.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, you can see it really well. I'm excited because as Danny just pointed out, I've actually seen a few of these movies. So
good.
Yeah, Danny, have you seen, out of those 15 movies they discussed, have you seen every single one of them?
There were a few that they put up that I hadn't seen. They like threw Day of the Beast on there. I like it like real quick, and I had not seen that. I think that's on like a couple of my like horror queues on different streaming services. And then there was a couple of like the real classic ones from like the 40s and 50s. The Don Knotts movie I had not seen. The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, I think it was called.
Terrible.
Okay, because it's funny. My dad used to rent me the big like plastic box VHSs, and one of the ones I'll always remember is The Incredible Mr. Limpet with Don Knotts.
Right.
And so like, I'm trying to explain to Charlotte, I'm like, oh, that's Don Knotts. He's like an all-time great like comic actor, and he's done all these movies. And she's like, so have you seen this one? I'm like, no, I never even heard of The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. And but now, I don't know, maybe I won't see it. But I have seen most of these, and it's really weird. My mom, of all people, my mom's one of her favorite movies is Arsenic and Old Lace. So like I grew up watching Arsenic and Old Lace.
Yeah.
Repeatedly. I think like my dad had taped it off of TV, and we had like a VHS scribbled in my dad's handwriting, Arsenic and Old Lace, that my mom would like watch. And then I think I taped over it with Saturday Night's Main Event one time.
Oh man, video stores and fucking taping things, and oh my god, I have so many random things taped on VHS, and my mom still has a lot of them too. But one thing that I saw over and over again as a kid was Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads over here. Mike, is that like one of your old time favorites?
Yeah, I mean, I saw it as a little kid, and it was foundational to me. Absolutely. I think it's the best Abbott and Costello movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a lot of the collection because my aunt, my family, they just were big fans of them. And so my aunt was interested in my kids watching those movies the way that I did. And so she just sent me like all the fucking Abbott and Costello movies, which are on like 2 DVDs. You just watch all of them now,
Is this for anybody else? I'm pretty sure I saw Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein before I saw any of the Universal horror movies.
Yeah.
Oh, 1000%. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was like my gateway to Universal horror, where so like it took me a little bit growing up, especially to like really appreciate those Universal movies, because when you get introduced to them with the ridiculousness of Abbott and Costello, you're kind of like, oh, now I'm supposed to take Frankenstein, the Frankenstein monster seriously. Now I'm supposed to take the Wolfman seriously. Okay.
Right.
I'll try.
I know. I mean, I just would watch it over and over again. And it's funny because one of the talking heads on the show, they made some kind of joke. They were like, oh, it's before Abbott and Costello got lame or something like that. Or like, while they were still funny. And I'm like, motherfucker, the Abbott and Costello are really funny. I love them watching, that movie. I watched that movie over and over again. And I've seen them with The Invisible Man. I think they were with The Mummy as well. Mike, you and I actually talked about them the last time I was on your show, right? We did Bubba Hotep.
No, we talked about it. Well, coming up, I'll use this as an opportunity to plug. Coming up all October at Pop Culture Man Children, we're doing Universal Monsters. And Peter joined me to talk about the Wolfman, and we got into a conversation about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
There you go. That's right. Yeah, the Wolfman. Yeah. And it's cool because like today's episode, they also talk about American Werewolf in London, and there's all these like horror icons that kind of pop up in these movies, but they always have these weird zany twists. So I wanted to talk about some of the little concepts they threw on the screen. One of them was splat stick, and they mentioned Evil Dead 2 when they talk about splat stick. Have you guys ever heard that term before?
Never. I never have.
Yeah.
I did not even realize that they wrote splat stick, and I just, because I'm always like with my little notebook, and I just saw the word quickly, and I just turned and jotted down slapstick because my brain didn't compute that. So I thought I was like, what the fuck is Pete talking about?
Yeah,
That's
well,
really,
it's one of my
movies that they mentioned, though. That's an amazing term.
Right, exactly. And one of the people they had talking when they talked about Splatstick was what do you call it? Patrick Willems. I'm a big fan of his YouTube channel. And he's just one of the talking heads. They have Patrick Willems this time around. They have Dead Meat James. This is gonna sound so bad, but like his wife.
Chelsea Rebecca.
Yeah. So they reached out to the YouTubers. I figure like maybe 20 specials from now, we'll eventually be on there too. And they'll have a video footage of me in my garage talking about something. But Patrick Willems, I think, said this phrase, about Evil Dead 2, where he said it was so gory, it becomes the Three Stooges. And
then in Army of Darkness, it literally becomes the Three Stooges. Like they're doing Three Stooges gags in Army of Darkness.
And it's so weird because they don't mention Army of Darkness at all, I think, in this episode.
I always come back. Army of Darkness, there's a weird rights issue. So like if you ever notice, whenever they release like an Evil Dead set, Army of Darkness is almost never included, and it was put out by a different production company. And part of me thinks that they didn't want to tangle with the rights to like show footage from it. Whereas Evil Dead 2, and the other later films in the franchise, I think are all, and like Ash vs. Evil Dead, are all under the same umbrella.
That's so weird. Okay. Yeah, it's funny because like I feel like Evil Dead has such a big part in all of our hearts. Like we talk about it a lot on this channel. Danny, I think you said it's like your favorite franchise, right?
It's easily my favorite franchise. I think all 5 movies are uniquely perfect in their own way. I think that the series is one of the best horror comedy series that they've ever done based on a horror film. And yeah, I love it. And Evil Dead 2 is one of those movies that is, and we've talked about this, I think the 3 of us, I think we've had Brian on to talk about this as well. Evil Dead 2 is it's a Mount Rushmore horror movie for me in terms of getting me into the genre.
Yeah.
The VHS box scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. And then when I finally saw it, all I wanted to do was watch it. It's like up there with Dream Warriors in like that foundational piece of 80s horror that without it, I'm probably not sitting here at 8:11 on a Saturday talking to you two guys about horror movies.
Yeah. I can't remember if I saw the first Evil Dead first or if I saw Evil Dead 2 first, but it is foundational for me too. Mike, with all the comedies that they threw on there, including Evil Dead 2, do you feel like a lot of these movies are legitimately funnier than just some straight up comedies?
That's a good question. I think when you're in fear mode, any kind of joke is like it's like a valve being pushed, so some steam is released.
Yeah.
You look at like a famous line, "We're gonna need a bigger boat." It's not a really funny joke, but it comes after a jump scare, right? Where the shark comes out of the water above Roy Scheider, and then he backs up, and then he says, "We're gonna need a bigger boat," and you're given a respite to like haha and like come back down to earth from having just been scared shitless.
Yeah. You feel it stronger because there might be something that was like really scary. And it's funny because I was watching these movies that are on this list, and I was like, how many of them are genuinely scary in some parts? And like, could you guys think of some of the 15 that they went over that like, oh yeah, no, that's genuinely scary in certain parts? Like American Werewolf in London. What else we got?
American Werewolf in London had one scene that like made Charlotte start crying, and we had to pause the movie. It was him waking up like the vampire in the hospital. She wasn't ready for that. The dream sequence with the fucking Nazi werewolves, like also.
Right.
I think there's a couple of the movies that toe the line. Like I just took Charlotte to the AMC dine-in in Staten Island to see Shaun of the Dead when it was out, and they brought it up in this episode how Shaun of the Dead is this. It's perfect. It's an absolutely perfect movie because it's a perfect parody of what it's doing, but it also manages to be insanely funny, and then it hits you with some outright scare moments that you're not expecting because you just come to, like, I'm watching a comedy, so all these characters are going to make it out alive, and then they don't. And then there's the moment at the end with his mom, and you're like tearing up as you're watching. You're like, wait, what's happening? And so Shaun of the Dead to me is that kind of movie where there are some like genuinely great zombie horror moments amongst one of the funniest movies you're ever seeing.
Yeah.
Like I saw, I mean, I'm sure some of us when we were younger, the opening scene of Ghostbusters is terrifying.
Yeah.
I think it's easy. I think it's easy. Jump scares are easy, and I don't mean that. And I don't mean to say that they're cheap. I think jump scares are very effective, and I like jump scares. But you could put a jump scare in any. There's a jump scare in Citizen Kane. I mean, you could just throw a jump scare into anything. Did you guys? I want to say I like this. I like this series. But did you guys in any way feel like their definition of horror comedy was broader than maybe your personal? Like Ghostbusters is my favorite movie. It's tattooed on my body. I don't, and it has some jump scares. I don't consider it a horror comedy.
Right. Actually, that's a really, really good point, Mike, because I was going to bring this up too. They do their top 15. I don't know if you guys have noticed this with this show yet, but basically they focus on specific movies, and at the very end, they're like, here's the must-see list, and then the must-see list is just the movies that they talked about in depth.
Right.
And they kept showing Ghostbusters, but they never like focused just on Ghostbusters.
Or Young Frankenstein. I'm sorry, Young Frankenstein is one of the best comedies ever. It's not I don't see it as a horror comedy personally. I don't see the Addams Family as a horror comedy.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So
I
like,
think,
go ahead, Danny.
I think that for at least for Young Frankenstein and the Addams Family, the entire nature of those movies is that they are like send-ups of the horror genre. And I think that just by that alone, you can wiggle the horror comedy aspect to it. Where like Young Frankenstein is one of my favorite comedies of all time. I think we can all agree on that.
Right.
But like it still is a Frankenstein movie in a Gothic castle with Igor, and you know it still has the elements of like Dracula Dead and Loving It, which I think is terrible. I that's like that to me is, again, you're taking a classic horror character and you're turning it, like I thought they might have included a more recent movie like Renfield or something like that in here. I'll tell you one movie that I was really weird that I did not really, when I saw this in the movie theater, I didn't love it, and I didn't really understand its inclusion here. Was Megan.
Yes.
I didn't view Megan as a comedy at all.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not a huge Megan fan. And even Charlotte, when she saw it, we kind of walked out of the movie being like, yeah, we kind of hoped that would be better. And like, yeah, it has like a viral dance moment, but like the movie's about like grief and like this really obnoxious woman who doesn't want to take care of a small child. And I don't know. I didn't really find enough of it to qualify as a horror comedy. So I was a little.
I love Megan, and I
Okay.
find it hysterical. But the thing
I
is,
know I'm in the minority with Megan, so I get it.
It's true camp in that its front face is earnest. You know what I mean? Like it's truly camp in that it's not. It has very few actual jokes. I think it's like Susan Sontag said, real camp can't know it's camp. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I feel like going too far would be something like Sharknado, where they're trying to make a bad movie. Something like Megan, I think, on one level, you could read it earnestly, but just underneath its core, I think it knows it's ridiculous. Like when they're talking and when they're in that dinner the dinner table sequence where the protagonist turns Megan off while she's talking and she says something like, "I'm sorry, I thought we were having a conversation." I thought that was the funniest shit because it's ridiculous, but it's not really a joke per se.
Right. Guys, unfortunately, Megan is one of the 5 movies I didn't see or I guess 7 movies, right? Because I saw 8 out of 15. So Megan is one of the ones I didn't see. So I don't have a dog in this fight.
That's a good movie. That's a good movie for you to watch, like with Pepper, and then you could break the tie between me and Mike. And
yes, is Megan good or not? Well, I mean, it's funny because like the inverse of Mike's original question, because actually, I think it was you, Danny. You were saying like, is it too broad, right? Were they covering movies that like didn't really fit? Oh no, Mike said it. Thank you. Yeah, like say like Addams Family Values maybe doesn't count as horror, but it's a comedy, right? And then I almost would say the same for Beetlejuice too. It's weird because when they make shows like this, they make these kind of sweeping proclamations of like, this counts as this counts as this, right? And I never personally thought of like Beetlejuice as horror, but I think that like what Danny was saying before is that things can have like the trappings of horror, and I think that earns it a horror list. Now, one thing that you guys both know, because I know that Mike, you've gone to the video store, in Staten Island a lot, and Danny, you worked in a video store, I think at one point, or no, you worked at a movie theater.
Movie theater, yeah.
Right. And so, like all of us though, have gone to like Blockbuster and our local video stores over and over and over again. Where would you find Addams Family Values? Where would you find Beetlejuice? What section would they be in? Do you guys remember?
I think comedy.
They'd be in comedy. Yeah.
I'm being attacked by the sun. Hold on.
I think genre is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
You could spend all day parsing hairs about what is a genre, what isn't a genre, what is a revisionist of a genre.
I feel like most of my Twitter use is arguing with people over whether Jaws is a horror movie.
Right.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, Mike. Like, I feel like it gets to a point where like genre is a very subjective thing, and like movies can have they can appeal differently to different people. They can be multiple genres at the same time.
Right.
I mean, that's why like phrases like rom-com exist, or horror comedy exist. Like, we acknowledge that some movies are not just horror movies. They're not just romantic movies. They're not just comedies. Sometimes, and then you'll get like Lisa Frankenstein, which marketed itself as like a rom-zom-com.
Rom-zom-com. That's awesome. I think that like for me, if I was going to make the distinction for what is a horror comedy, I think it would be something that if you were in the video store, you would find it in the horror section. And so like I was very surprised to see Beetlejuice and Addams Family Values on there. One movie that showed up that I was like, oh shit, I have not seen this and it's going to be embarrassing, is Reanimator. And I was going to ask you guys, do you feel like that is a comedy?
Yeah.
A horror comedy?
Oh, fuck. Yes.
Okay.
It straight up makes jokes. It's yeah. It's ridiculous.
But even and they go into this, just Jeffrey Combs, the way he interprets his entire character, he's playing it. He's almost like the straight man, where he's playing everything completely straight in an absolutely absurd situation. And he has these lines where he's literally talking to the decapitated head of his former boss. And he's like, who's going to believe you? You're just a talking head. Go get a job at a sideshow. And you're like, you can't believe how earnestly he's saying these lines. But they're, to like Mike's point, they're patently fucking ridiculous. And he's talking to a severed head who has just commanded his body to help him try to go down on a woman. And you're like, everything about this movie is fucking insane.
Right.
Yeah. Also, Pete, that is a movie. Do not watch with Pepper.
Oh no.
Well, that's what I wanted to bring up too, is that it's funny with this documentary, the footage they actually choose to show from a movie, right? Because like in this one episode alone, they show that infamous scene where the severed head is going to go down on Barbara Crampton. And I know I always think about that scene because they mention it in American Beauty. They're like, hey, have you ever seen that movie Reanimator where that severed head is going to go down the body? And it's funny because they use that footage to talk about Reanimator, and there's just a scene where like Barbara Crampton is topless, and I think the dead body like gropes her breast and stuff. Yeah, it's just so funny like what they choose. And then when they show Return of the Living Dead, another movie I haven't seen.
Really?
Sorry. Yeah, I know. I'm bad. I know.
I thought it was just Japanese movies. I thought you had a thing against Japanese people.
Yes. Me and Godzilla, we got that in common, man. We fucking hate them. But no, I was like, okay, well, I know that there's this really famous scene with this like punk girl named Trash. Lorena Quigley, or what's her first name?
Linnea Quigley.
Yeah, I was like, okay. I know, like, she's super hot in that one scene, and they show that. There's nothing comedic about that, though. But they're like, let's show this. You know?
But
it's
they
moment.
Yeah, they also preface that by showing the scene where she's like getting turned on, sitting against a tombstone, and she's like licking her lips, and she's like, "Have you ever felt about all the ways of dying?" And you're like, this woman is crazy. And then she like is so turned on that she jumps up on a tombstone. And then they show the aftermath of that, which is she's now topless and naked, and her boyfriend, who is like a super punk with like a chain from his nose down, and she's trying to like grind up against him, and he's just like, what do you think this is? This isn't a costume. and it's so freaking funny. And that movie just goes for it every single time. And like they have a Nazi hiding out working in a crematorium in that movie, and you're just like, you spend the whole movie going like, I'm pretty sure this guy's a fucking Nazi, and like, yeah, he's a fucking Nazi, and they never bring it up, and it's just hilarious.
Is he the zombie that's like all in yellow that runs out?
No, this is a human character.
Oh, okay, that's fucking weird. Yeah, I want to see it. I'm such a big fan of Dan O'Bannon as a person, because like I used to always watch the making of Alien documentaries, and Dan O'Bannon, who directed Return of the Living Dead, he's in it a lot, talking about making Alien. And it's just weird because he kind of looks like Orville Redenbacher. And it's just it's funny to think that he made this fucking Return of the Living Dead movie. But like I think that Return of the Living Dead, even though they consider it a comedy and stuff, I think that it affected like zombie lore too, right? Because isn't that where like they say brains, right? Or and even like
parody comes from, I think.
The what?
The parody of zombies saying brains. I think it really only is in that movie, or at least begins in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know it's like a classic, and I've seen like funny. There's like one part where like one of the zombies says over the walkie, like, "Send more cops," right? Yeah.
Later on, that same zombie says, "Send more paramedics."
Oh my god!
But to just add on to what Mike was saying, like in Romero's of the Dead films, especially of course Night and Dawn, which came out before Return of the Living Dead, there was never anything about brains. It was always flesh. They were always eating flesh, and they were ripping bodies apart, literally in Dawn of the Dead with Tom Savini's makeup and special effects. They were ripping bodies open and pulling out the organs. It was never specifically the brains until Tarman comes out of that basement and goes, brains. And then they actually go on to explain that later on in a moment that's not funny, but almost sad.
Yeah.
Where there's like this rotting corpse who is talking to them and saying that like eating the brains makes the pain stop. And it's like, oh, this is like fucking weirdly deep now.
Yeah, it's disturbing.
Yeah. Are you a fan of that movie, Mike?
I'm a huge fan of that movie. Huge
Yeah.
fan. And also,
it's also a 4th of July horror movie that like you must watch. It's like that and Jaws are the 4th of July double features every year.
Yeah.
Mike, what about The Curse of or Dr. Phibes, The Abominable Dr. Phibes? Have you ever seen that one?
That's one I haven't seen.
Yeah. Well, this is Danny, have you seen it?
I have. I'm a monster Vincent Price fan.
Yeah.
And I think that Vincent Price never took anything completely seriously.
Right.
And I think that's why so many of his movies are scary, but also funny. And that includes like the original House on Haunted Hill. That includes Dr. Phibes. They like in passing, they mention Theater of Blood as like one of the, they do like those random top 5s in Horror's Greatest.
Yes.
Theater of Blood was there, and that's another one. It's very similar to Phibes, where it's like a revenge movie. In that movie, he's an actor who is going after the critics who like lambasted his last show.
Oh God.
And I was like, that would be a great movie to potentially like remake in the modern times with like YouTube critics and Rotten Tomatoes, and yeah, that would be a lot of fun. But yeah, I've always been a huge Vincent Price fan. Like his voice to me is his voice is a horror comedy to me because his voice can be scary, but it also the tone and accent to his voice is also kind of just naturally funny.
Yeah. He has a campy voice.
Yeah, he does. And so like, Dr. Phibes is great. But also, yeah, Theater of Blood was awesome too.
Well, I think it's really interesting because I didn't see this movie, but they show a ton of clips from it, and they emphasize the point that he doesn't speak dialogue from his mouth throughout the whole movie. He has that like device that amplifies the voice from his throat, and so a lot of it is just Vincent Price's inflections, right? He's always like looking like like looking real serious, right? And I have this little ticker going across the bottom. I was thinking that you guys could kind of give me your two cents on this as well. But Darkman, as soon as they took off Vincent Price's like makeup and stuff in the clips, and they show that skull face, I was like, oh, holy shit, that looks like Darkman. And I was like, wait a minute, this movie seems like Darkman. It's like this guy who has this like medical knowledge getting revenge on people, and it's like a list of people. And he kind of looks like Darkman to begin with. Did you guys kind of get that vibe?
Well, I must admit that I haven't seen Darkman. That's one for me. I've never.
Are you fucking kidding me?
How dare you?
Okay, you can't be upset with anybody else.
Well, so okay, you have seen Darkman. Do you think that like this movie gives you Darkman vibes?
Oh, I think I saw Dr. Phibes. I mean, I have not seen The Abominable Dr. Phibes in probably 20 to 25 years. I think I rented it from like the video store. So that just gives you a time period. But just from watching these clips, I could totally see that. I always got the idea that from Raimi that he wanted to make the movie The Shadow and he couldn't get the rights for it. And so he said, fuck it, I'll just make my own superhero. And maybe in doing that, he borrowed from Dr. Phibes. I mean, Raimi does seem like the type of guy to do that.
Yeah.
He seems like a person who obviously has a great love of the genre and the past of the genre. So I don't put that past him. But I honestly, I think that's a really good pull by you for like a conversation piece, because I honestly did not think that when I was watching this.
Well, first of all, it was making me want to go watch this Dr. Fives movie, and then it was making me want to go
Yeah,
watch
me too.
Darkman again. So, yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about this show, right? Is that you're like, oh, holy shit, this movie exists. This looks awesome.
Yeah.
And so, rounding off the list though are a couple that I have seen, and this one kind of has some importance on our channel because Fright Night, I got to talk to Tom Holland, the director of this movie, and they interview him in this episode. He says stuff similar to what he said to me when we were talking about the making of Fright Night. Such a nice guy, just really humble and cool when I was talking to him. I know, Danny, you and I have talked about Fright Night a little bit. Mike, I wanted to get your thoughts on Fright Night. Do you like Fright Night?
Yeah, I love Fright Night. It's one of those movies that I think has I know I'm going to sound very like Gen Z or whatever, but it's very cozy.
Yeah.
It's got cozy vibes, and I've talked a lot about on my show what cozy is and what actually defines cozy. I'm not sure really.
Yeah.
But just the whole, like, he's a horror fan, and you got the horror host. There's something about it. I feel, it's a scary movie, but I don't know. It speaks so deeply to the nerd in me. I love it. Yeah, I think it's a great movie, and it is kind of a take on Rear Window.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tom Holland was saying that when I interviewed him. It was like, very much like inspired by Rear Window. It's funny because this movie, when they talk about, I can never say her name correctly. Tananarive Due. Did I get that right?
Tananarive Due, yeah.
She is almost been like the MVP for this show, where she makes like really good points every episode. Where I'm like, ooh, that's a really good talking point. This time around, she was talking about how the main vampire, he is like kind of sexy, and it was like this movie where she made she understood what vampires were about in this movie, because he's like scary and sexy at the same time, and she hadn't really experienced that in any other movie. And I was thinking about how this one is a good example of, it's definitely a comedy. There's definitely funny parts, but there's legitimately scary parts, I think, for its time. Like, I think that when he shows up in the kid's bedroom or whatever in the beginning, and he's like holding him up and stuff, I'm like, this would have been scary to see in the theater at that point. What do y'all think?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
What I always forget her name. She's Marcy from
Amanda Bierce.
Amanda Bierce, right? And she's a director too. Her, when she has like the crazy smile, that's a haunting image.
Absolutely, yeah. And they kind of ruin it by putting it on the cover of the movie, right? Like,
yeah,
that kind of image.
Oh, the poster, by the way, though, one of the best posters ever.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's funny because I've only seen her in that and Married with Children. And like, she's such a character on Married with Children that it's kind of hard to picture as this sort of like this love interest, like teenage girl in this movie.
Right,
I saw
right.
Married with Children before this. So it kind of blew my mind that she is that vampire that you see, in all the artwork for this movie. Yeah. No, I'm a fan, but I think that the next one is one that we'll have a lot to say about. Mike, have you ever seen the movie Gremlins?
Wait, is that the one where they're like worms under the ground?
Yes.
And the dad from Family Ties is in it.
Yes, it's a classic, man. Yeah,
well, great. No, Gremlins is absolutely. I'm looking for where I have the most. There's a toy right there. Gremlins is Gremlins. I mean, to me, it's a Christmas classic. I watch it every Christmas. But it's incredible. I love Gremlins.
Yeah.
Good.
And Danny, like Charlotte, obviously you showed her Gremlins probably at a very early age, right?
Oh yeah. She loves she actually loves part 2.
Yeah.
I think yeah, there we go. I think she loves part 2 because of all of the comedy aspects with the different gremlins. Like, she loved the idea of there being like the super intelligent gremlin, like, who talks with the British accent.
Right. The brain gremlin.
And then there's also like the scary shit, like the giant spider gremlin that's going around, and And then of course there's like the hot sexy gremlin who's like trying to mac it to who's that Robert
Robert Picardo.
Robert
Yeah.
Picardo, yeah. And at the end he's just like, yeah, all right, well, whatever. But yeah, to me, like the peak of Gremlins though is always oh god, the actress is Kevin Kline's wife,
Gates.
Phoebe Cates. See, that's what I love. We bail each other out when we can't remember anybody's name. Phoebe Cates' story about her father,
Yes.
which apparently in like test screenings, the audience was like, we don't get this. And I think it really like brings the movie down. Can you remove it? And Phoebe Cates like apparently told Joe Dante, like, I'm not going to do this movie if you take this scene out. And he was like, no, we're leaving this scene in. It's important to the movie. And every time I watch Gremlins, I keep like forgetting that scene is about to happen. And then that story always just, it makes me laugh uncomfortably.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think is the
Sure,
best
joke.
sign. Yeah, there's nothing funny about it, but the whole her telling it
It's
is so
ridiculous.
funny.
Because
Yeah.
she doesn't like Christmas, and then she's like, "Let me tell you why I don't like Christmas," and it's the most gruesome story that she literally
Go ahead.
soliloquy to like stop and like perform for us. It's so ridiculous. And then in Gremlins 2, she has a one where she talks about why she doesn't like 4th of July or whatever, or President's Day.
President's Day, yeah,
And,
because
like
it's about
cut her off,
Lincoln.
like we're good, that's fine.
Yeah.
It always reminded me of the scene in Family Guy where the guy's like, cigarettes killed my father and raped my mother.
Oh yeah. Oh my god.
Where it just comes completely out of nowhere, and you're like, why do you hate cigarettes so much? Oh, it's like, cigarettes killed my relatives. But then it goes another step in like, yeah, oh man. Like, oh, my dad died at Christmas. Oh, okay, that's sad. Well, no. Let me tell you how he died at Christmas.
Right. Well, I think that the person that has the best talking point for Gremlins is Gigi Saul Guerrero. Because she talks about how she's like, oh, the kill count is easily 230 kills in these two movies. And it's so funny because, I mean, I was trying to think of how she got that specific number. When you watch Gremlins, there are deaths. I always kind of think that the Futtermans, right? That's
That's
like
Dick
I feel in the first one, they're like, okay, they died. Like Gremlins drove a fucking tractor through their house. They retcon it to where they're alive in the second one.
Because you need Dick Miller in a Joe Dante movie.
Exactly. But I was gonna say that in the first movie, as far as kills, I mean, I know that we have the teacher at the school, we have the old woman who's in her chair that gets like shot out the window, the Futtermans. I was trying to think of like what other deaths. I mean,
chaos. There's a sort of montage of chaos towards the end, and you could say that a lot of people die in that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know, isn't there like they're attacking Santa Claus at one point? Like you could say he gets killed. Yeah. But it's funny because I feel like Gremlins 1 and Gremlins 2 are kind of the perfect talking pieces for what we've been discussing today. Whereas Gremlins 2 feels more like a comedy, Gremlins 1 feels more like a horror movie, you know? Yeah. And what was another interesting point was that one of the talking heads said that they thought that Gremlins was going to be kind of like E.T. when they went in from the advertising and stuff. But then it was like, oh, no, this shit's intense. And I don't think, as a kid that was born in 1982, I don't think I ever felt like Gremlins was going to be like E.T. I always thought, I was like, oh, there's something scary about this.
Yeah, it does have an Amblin-esque-ness to it.
Oh, absolutely.
Gizmo is the cutest thing ever created for a movie. So at least for the first 20 minutes of Gremlins, you're sitting there and going, oh, this is going to be a cute movie about a boy and his new adorable alien pet. But like what Gremlins does even early, like that store that the dad buys Gizmo in is kind of haunting. It reminds me of like if you remember, like the very beginning and then the literally very end of Hellraiser, where like the guy is shopping around, Frank is shopping around for the lament configuration,
Right.
and it reminded me of that, almost like the in The Conjuring, they have like that secret, they have like the room where Annabelle sits, and The Conjuring 3 is basically the kids get locked in there and all the different cursed objects. And that store basically could be its own like horror anthology show. Like
Yeah.
Gremlins ends and another parent walks in and buys another cursed object for their kid, and
Yeah.
we go off on another like scary story. And so like I think Gremlins gets off to like a really creepy thing, but then they introduce Gizmo and you're like, oh, it is a cute little family movie. And then all of a sudden it becomes freaking Alien, and you're like, oh, no, it's not.
Yeah. I mean, Mike, wouldn't you say that like the sequence with the mom in the kitchen is like a pretty fucking terrifying scene?
Yeah, it's yes, that whole sequence is played, it's played, there's a lot of tension there. Leading up to the gremlin in the tree. Yeah, I do think, well, you and I talked about, we did an episode of Pop Culture Man Children on Gremlins 2. And Gremlins 2 is sort of a parody of Gremlins 1, but Gremlins 1, that's the thing. I don't want to go back to what the point we made before. But I think for me, horror comedy is about the right amount of ingredients. Like if it's too comedy or too horror, to me, like a good horror comedy like Evil Dead 2 is like, 50% horror, 50% comedy. And I think Gremlins 1 achieves that.
Yeah. And Gremlins 2 doesn't. It's interesting.
Comedy. I mean, yeah.
So going off of what you just said, is there any movie that's too much horror and not enough comedy? Because it's interesting. I was like, does Scream count as a horror comedy? Because I feel like maybe Scream is too much horror and not enough comedy.
It's on a lot of lists online, but it's not in this series. But
yeah,
I personally don't count it as a horror comedy, but I also think it's very satirical, obviously, and
funny.
It's funny, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're prone that anytime we laugh or anytime there's a comic relief character, to throw out the word comedy, but like crucial to the horror genre, especially the slasher subgenre, is a comic relief character.
Right.
Like you look in Friday the 13th Part 5, there's a guy sitting in a porta potty singing songs to his girlfriend, and it's like, oh, this is the comic relief part. But nobody would ever put a Friday the 13th movie in, there's always a comic relief character in the Friday the 13th. In Nightmare on Elm Street, by probably part 4 and 5, Freddy is the fucking comic relief character.
Right.
So like, you can make an argument that Freddy's Dead is a horror comedy just because Freddy doesn't take anything seriously, and he basically talks in one-liners. So I think Scream is a good example of just Wes Craven being able to like twist the genre he helped create, and add in those like satirical moments, those characters that kind of pull the rug out a little bit. But I would never really include Scream as a horror comedy, or like even the silly Nightmare on Elm Streets. I would never,
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like you bring up Freddy and Jason, and don't you kind of feel like Freddy versus Jason, you almost fit into a horror comedy? And then what about like Jason X?
Jason X, I was just thinking, could be a horror comedy.
Yeah. Because what I guess that's also like the Leprechaun in Space. They also, in this episode, they show a couple clips from Bride of Chucky, which I will argue Child's Play 1, 2, and 3, and then later on, Curse and Cult of Chucky are straight horror movies. But Bride and Seed of Chucky, those are horror comedies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Chucky series, which is great and has amazing gore and has amazing characters and violence and scary moments, that also is very, tongue in cheek. And I think that kind of ties kind of both of them together, like the horror aspects of the early Child's Play movies with the horror comedy aspects of Bride and Seed.
Yeah, I haven't seen enough of the films in that series. I think I've only seen the original Child's Play, which is directed by Tom Holland, and then I think I saw Bride of Chucky, and that's it. So I can't vouch for it. But another movie, and this is the one I was thinking we could kind of end this all on, is a movie by fucking Peter Jackson, which I also have not seen. But it's
Okay,
very
I
infamous.
was nervous. I was like, is he not going to talk about Dead Alive in this episode?
No,
Okay.
no. So have both of you guys seen this movie?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So tell me what y'all think about it, because I know nothing about this movie.
God, it's been like maybe 20 years since I saw it. It's one of those Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, I think, were so influential. It's one of those things like Bloody Muscle Bodybuilder from Hell. It's clearly inspired by Evil Dead. But it's got comedy in it. I mean, I also like The Frighteners, which I think is an underrated horror comedy. It's super gross, as they point out in the show. It does have a funny priest. I don't know. It's been so long since I saw it.
Okay. Danny, what about you? What are your thoughts?
I actually saw this, I think either earlier this year or last year. Alamo Drafthouse had it for like one night. And no, Alamo Drafthouse had like Mystery Movie Monday or something like that. And I went with a buddy of mine and they were like, guys, don't tell anybody because we're not really supposed to be showing this in theaters, because apparently like Peter Jackson and there's a rights issue, but they played Dead Alive. And I love this movie. I think it just keeps every time it just keeps upping the ante. Where like Charlotte was watching some of the clips from it, and the talking heads talking about it are discussing how absolutely sickening. I think it was Axel Carolyn was talking about how disgusting this movie is, and there's a dinner scene where you're just sitting there going like, oh god, and then when you think that's as gross as the movie can get, there are no limits to the amount of like practical gore effects that happen later in this movie. And it's so amazing. I think it had the Guinness record for most fake blood used in a movie for a long period of time. I think it's probably been beaten by now.
I saw a movie last night that I think beat it.
What movie is that?
I want to recommend it. The Substance.
Oh shit! I can't wait to see that. I might go see it either later today or tomorrow.
It's incredible. It's so good. It's an amazing horror comedy. It's great. You'll love it.
Okay.
Oh, so it's a fucking horror comedy too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I have you ever seen Yuza's Society?
I have not. Danny, I'm sure Danny has.
That's another horror comedy. It's not like Society, but it had Society vibes, and that's all I'll say about it.
Oh man, okay. I've seen other people who saw it at festivals who mentioned the same thing, who have said like Brian Yuzna and Stuart Gordon are like celebrating the release of this movie. I loved her movie Revenge, which is still on Shudder. It's like probably the best and most beautiful looking rape revenge movie you'll ever see. The director of The Substance, and I can't wait for that. I'm going to see it either later today or tomorrow. Like the weekend will not end without me seeing it.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much we've brought up rape in this horror comedies episode. But it's a good thing we don't get monetized at all on this channel, so it doesn't matter, right? But I mean, like, I love Peter Jackson as a director. Obviously like the Lord of the Rings movies, maybe not necessarily the Hobbit movies. And I love the Frighteners as well. I'm a big fan of his King Kong that came out. So, it's one of those movies where I do want to see it, but then I saw some of the shots from this movie. I was like, oh, I'm definitely not going to eat while I'm fucking watching this movie.
The fact that this movie exists makes me like, every time Peter Jackson announces a project, I'm like, shit, can you just make a $5 million splatter movie again?
Yeah, I agree.
Please? Because like I love Peter Jackson, but it's like Meet the Feebles and Bad Taste and this and The Frighteners, which overall is one of my favorite movies of all time. And then he just got into this 3+ hour blockbuster phase. And I want him to come back to this.
Mhm.
Like I always make this joke to a friend of mine at work is a diehard Lord of the Rings fan. He's like used a vacation time to go to New Zealand and like visit the locations and the shooting spots.
Yeah.
And like he'll be like, "Oh, Danny, come on, you're such a film fan. You have to rewatch the Lord of the Rings movies." And I'm like, "Well, I will, but like to me, Peter Jackson's classics are Dead Alive and The Frighteners." And he's like, "Shut up! You shut your mouth."
Yeah, I mean, it's
I'd love him to make another movie like this.
Yeah,
well to me, it's interesting, and this could be our kind of like our last talking point is that like Sam Raimi, Peter Jackson, they show their movies in this episode. Two horror comedy guys go on to make some of the best like fantasy and comic book adaptations, right, of our generation. So I think there's something about horror comedies that translates into like fantasy and comic book stuff too. But I was going to ask you guys as kind of like a last point, what would you consider to be your favorite horror comedy? And it doesn't have to be something that was on this list either.
That's a hard. I do have two choices that are favorites of mine that were not talked about in this that I was surprised. One is Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Oh, wow.
And the other would be Tragedy Girls.
I never even heard of that one.
Really good.
It's like Scream if Scream were from the point of view of Billy and Stu.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And Billy and Stu were attractive young girls. It's really good.
When did that come out?
One of the girls is Negasonic Teenage Warhead.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's like what, like not even 10 years old?
I think it's like 2017.
16, 17-ish, I think.
Okay. Nice. Okay, well, I haven't heard of the second one, and then the first one I heard of, but I saw it as like a kid. It's considered like it's a comedy. There's funny stuff in that movie.
Well, it's camp. Again, it's camp. So it's like it's a horror movie, but it's one of the performance. It's kind of like what Betty Davis is doing. I think is similar to what Nicolas Cage is doing in Long Legs, which we could argue about whether Long Legs is a horror comedy. The performance is so bonkers that you can't help but laugh at it. You can't help but see it as a comedy.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I just remember seeing it as like a little kid and I was like really disturbed by it. So now I have to go. I actually want to see both your suggestions that you just talked about. What about you, Mr. Torkel? What would you put?
So like my easy answer would just be to say Evil Dead 2, but like to go with what Mike did, I'm going to bring up one movie that was not in this episode because they featured it in another episode, and I think they didn't want to do crossover, and you guys hinted at it before. Tremors. Tremors is a perfect horror comedy. It is giant underground worms with friggin' snake tentacles that come out of their mouths that look unbelievable and scary as hell. But it's also some of the greatest and funniest characters doing funny shit, having amazing back and forth dialogue. And I can watch Tremors almost every single day. Like I don't know what your definition of cozy means, but that movie is cozy for me. I can just throw Tremors on at any time. Charlotte loves it. I think we've watched it probably 3 or 4 times together. It's the type of movie where like Charlotte will be like, Dad, do you want to watch a movie tonight? And I'll be like, yeah, what do you want to watch? And I'll like name off 7, 8, 9 horror movies. And she'll be like, I don't know. Can we just watch Tremors? Yep. Boom. Tremors. It's perfect. I love it.
That's fucking awesome. Yeah. Great examples. Mike, I want to check out your movies too.
Hey, what was yours be?
Oh no, I'm just a poser. I would say that Evil Dead 2 would be mine as well. Just because to me, like when Evil Dead came out, when I saw it, because it came out, when I was really young. But when I saw it, it blew my mind that something could be scary and about that subject matter, but then be as funny as it is. I was like, how is this even possible? And just how wild and crazy it is. I feel I haven't shown it to my daughter yet, and I kind of worry that like she wouldn't get how important it is, or like what a big deal it is, just because of everything that's come after it. Right. But I mean, just Bruce Campbell alone is a fucking revelation, right?
Yeah.
So, that or Speak No Evil. I think that's really fucking funny too. So,
hey, can I just make? Speaking of horror comedies, I played trivia, and the talking heads in this episode, 2 of them, I always love to shout them out because they are the hosts of the best horror trivia in New York City, Final Exam Trivia. Michael Gingold and Ted Gagan, they are the hosts of that trivia, and they were talking heads in this episode. But my team name at trivia on Wednesday night was the Speak No Evil trailer. And we got shouted out by a friend of mine on Facebook because she was like, I can't believe how ridiculous that there's a team called the Speak No Evil trailer. And I said as a joke, like a year from now, we're still going to be the Speak No Evil trailer because it just won't ever go away.
Yeah, man, that's a fucking brilliant name for a fucking team. And I've heard good things about the American version. I think even from you.
Me too. Too. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard really good things. And I'm like, shit, I'm going to have to go see this movie.
Yeah. My mom, of all people, saw it. And she was like, she thought it was good. So, but she's a huge James McAvoy fan. Yeah. I feel like, speaking of James McAvoy, we could have covered some Shyamalan stuff too. Because I feel like Shyamalan stuff is like unintentionally comedy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway.
Comedy.
Yeah, but Mike, I was going to say, do you want to go ahead and plug your PCMC for us?
Absolutely. I do a podcast called PCMC Pop Culture Man Children. It comes out every Wednesday, and every October we celebrate Halloween all October. And wouldn't you know it, Pete, this October there are 5 Wednesdays.
Oh, shit.
So this October we are doing Universal Monsters. Me and Peter there did an episode on Wolfman. We've got episodes coming up on Dracula, Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. So look at anywhere pods are found. Find PCMC for Halloween.
That's fucking great. And then over on our channel, which you guys should definitely like and subscribe to, Danny and I are about to jump out of this recording and record In a Violent Nature. We're going to do a review of that movie. And then we're just going to continue doing our Horror's Greatest. Mike, we'd love to have you back on again if you want to do another Horror's Greatest.
Sure. I think this season's almost over.
Next week is the last episode, and it's Stephen King adaptations.
This has been a weird series. Can we? I like this series a lot, but don't you feel like this is sort of like miscellaneous stuff that they couldn't put in other documentaries?
It's the leftover stuff.
Yeah. It's weird, isn't it? 5 episodes. J-horror,
giant monsters,
movies, horror comedy, Stephen King, and then the first one, I really didn't like the first episode. It felt very fluffy to me, cliches and tropes.
Yeah,
I like that, but in full disclosure, I'm also reading 2 books right now, which are I just finished The Black Man Dies First, or The Black Guy Dies First, about black characters in horror movies, and then I finally am almost done with Men, Women, and Chainsaws about like women in horror. So that first episode hit home on a lot of things that I'm like literally reading at this exact moment. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I kind of like this.
Yeah.
But it does it. The thing with horror documentaries and Shudder in particular is if you just put on a bunch of stuff about horror movies, we'll sit there and we'll watch it and we'll end up talking about it for an hour. It's great.
Yeah. And masturbating. So anyway, that's how Mike, that's how on this show we end things, by me making a masturbation joke. But anyway, it's been fun, and we will see you guys next time with our Stephen King movie adaptation discussion. See y'all.